Hello there. My name is George Hurst. In this program, we're going to teach how to carve a bear's head in leather from a pencil drawing by Tony Lair. First, I would like to show you a copy of the original pencil drawing by Tony Lair, and then we'll give you some tips and hints on how to make a tracing of that. Here is the tracing that I made, and first of all, I need to tell you that when you trace the eyes, trace them very carefully. We will trace the upper lid first and then the lower lid. These will be where we're going to make cuts. We're also going to make cuts around the nose and the nostrils. Trace those as solid lines, as well as the muzzle. And when I get over here to the side, it's a little different, so I don't want to cut over there, so I just trace a dotted line where I want to do some beveling but not cutting. Same thing along the nose. Now down here, of course, the lower part of the jaw is rather hairy, so I trace that kind of like with real short little pencil marks, as you can see here. And the rest of it we mostly do it with either dotted lines or short cuts. Like here along the beard, I'll just do real short cuts. So I trace it as real shortcuts. What you're doing when you're tracing something from scratch like this that you are going to use, what you're doing with the tracing is sending yourself a message, telling yourself what to do. So in my case, I like to trace it just like I'm going to cut it. Like along here, I'm tracing with these short little marks where I'll cut with short little strokes. If I wanted to, I could trace that with a solid line or a dotted line, as long as I personally know what I'm doing. So this is how you make your tracing. We're now ready to trace to the leather. I'd like to tell you that I have dampened my leather quite thoroughly and set it aside for about 30 minutes so that it could soak in real good. And as it's beginning to return to its natural color, now is the best time to start your tracing. You will note that I have fastened my tracing to the top with tape. This is so that I can lift it from time to time and check on my progress. So I will start now by tracing first the eyes, and as I said before, we want to trace these very carefully. And right now is a good time to lift and make sure that you have a nice impression, and we have, so we can continue. I will next trace the nose. I like to trace the things first that I'm going to be cutting with a swivel knife, although we do a lot of this cutting with the swivel knife. Very much of it is done in short little cuts. In this case, I like to cut these longer lines, or I like to trace my longer lines. Now, as I said before, as I come around the muzzle, then I do a dotted line to indicate where I'm going to bevel only. Same thing off the nose and up to the eye. Come around the muzzle, start with a solid line, and then with dotted lines. along the lower lip, short little cuts. And if you notice on the drawing by Tony, there are some lines where we want a bevel only, so I've made those with a dotted line. Now for the beard, I'm going to start here, and I will do real short lines, because here's where we will be doing short cuts with the swivel knife. Also notice the direction of these cuts. You can determine that by looking at a copy of the original carving. You can see which directions that the lines should go. For the most part, most of the hair will come out of the head, come over and follow the way it normally would if you dropped water on the bear's head, and the water would run down in this direction. That's a good way to determine what direction the cuts should go. As you can see, we're getting a real nice tracing. So now we will continue to trace using the same method. Short lines where we want to make short cuts, dotted lines where we want to bevel only. One of the reasons we're getting a nice tracing is the fact that our moisture content is just right. And that completes my tracing. Now, here again, as I mentioned before, do any or all of the tracing that you need to do to indicate to yourself what you're going to be doing. To do the swivel knife cutting, I like to use the new ergonomic swivel knife fitted with a 1/4 inch angle ceramic blade of the thin variety for the fine cutting that we need to do. I'll start by cutting the nose first, and like all figure carving, as we end our cut, we end it slowly, not abruptly, so that we don't get or so that it looks a little more natural. Same thing is true with the nostril. Even though there are short hair endings on the muzzle, I want to cut the lower part of it, and then we'll show you why we're doing that later. Now for the eye, I'll bring my strop in and strop my blade so that it's nice and smooth. And I will cut the upper eyelid first, very carefully. Cut the upper eyelid, and then the lower eyelid. I like to cut from both directions, cutting away from the upper lid cut. I will do the other eye the same way. Now, after cutting the other nostril, I want to show you how I like to cut the beard and the places where we have hair endings. I like to do that with a short cut. See how I'm doing this? Short, deep cut, and make sure they're going in the right direction. You can tell this by looking at the original drawing or at the tracing pattern that we have provided. And as you get up to the top, you taper off slowly. These cuts are short, but they're rather deep. And please note the direction of the cut. When we get to the upper end, it's almost parallel with the beard itself. Now we'll do the same thing on all these other cuts. I might make these a little longer over here because the hair is a little longer and more shaggy on this part of the bear's head. When you get up on the higher part of the head here, you'll notice that the cuts are shorter. Same way with the cuts in front of the ear. They're quite short. The area around the ear, you'll notice that they're quite short and very close together. And notice the direction. Comes out all the way around. So we will continue to cut following the directions from our tracing, making short cuts and longer cuts depending on the length of the hair on the original drawing. It is now time to do our basic beveling, and we're going to do that with two figure carving bevelers, F896, F895, and a B200 smooth beveler. I'll start with the smooth beveler, and we'll first use that to bevel around the nose. Notice that I'll start out lightly and then tap a little harder. And I'm beveling away from the nose to get the nose to stand up above the muzzle. I'll use the same tool to do the muzzle. I'll start out lightly and then strike a little harder.